guys, and welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I am your co-host, Ray Russell, here, getting ready to dive back into 1975 and championship wrestling from Florida. But in order to get that insight, we got to bring him back onto the show, talking about the host of the show. Here he is, the one and only. Welcome back, Bob Roop.
Well, hey, Ray, man, it's good to hear your voice again, and hello to you listeners out there. Glad to be back with you.
Absolutely, and happy August, everyone. The first day of August, this show is dropping. Another month. Where does time go? My God, time flies when you're having fun, Bob.
Are you sure it's the first?
Absolutely.
I got 7:30 on my July 30th on my computer.
We're dropping on August 1st.
Oh, okay. Sorry, what a moron. I only had 11 years of college, so how am I supposed to do things like that? Maybe I got more with scar dust than I thought. Maybe I got a serious brain injury behind it.
Cut you a little deeper?
Yeah, all the way to the back. I got a scar from that one in the back of my head.
Oh my, that's a deep cut. Whew. Yeah. All right. Well, last week, Bob, we touched on Eddie Graham. You spent about a half hour of the program kind of dissecting your memories of the beginnings, where you first met Eddie Graham back at that banquet, all the way to the end of Eddie Graham, sadly, in the mid-1980s, some of the behind-the-scenes details of what was going on personally, financially, and whatnot. And this week, we're going to jump back into the mid-70s and head back to the Florida territory.
Right. Well, that's great. I mean, I spent the majority of my career there. That 2 years we've been talking about in 75 and 76 was... Well, I did stay 3 years with Ole, but I wasn't wrestling the whole time. I wasn't in the ring, but probably maybe a year of that time. The other 2 years I was working in the office and as a road agent, So, I was busy. I was full time.
Right.
In fact, I wasn't as busy as when I was working as assistant booker in Florida, because I was also wrestling there. So that's like, you're at the office all day, you go to the show and wrestle at night, you come back, go to bed, get up at like 9 o'clock to go back to the office, and then you don't get home till like 1, 2, or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Were you getting paid by the hour?
Well, I tell you what, one thing I was doing in Florida with that routine was, in order to spend some time with my wife, I would meet her. I'm so frugal now. I try not to spend a nickel I don't need to. At that time, every day I would meet her at lunch at a place that was equidistant. It was like halfway between the office and where we lived. And for like a couple of months, 3 or 4 months, at least twice a week, I'd ask her to meet me there, and we'd have lunch together. Probably, I don't know, it probably only cost like $20, but that would be like $50 now. Yeah, the extravagant life, because I've never been I wanted to go out and spend money in restaurants and bars, mainly not from lack of wanting to, just not having that kind of money to throw around. So that was different. Working there in Florida was a real grind. Before the program, we talked about some people we might discuss. Was George? I'll share something with you.
That's George McCreary, your old college buddy.
Yeah, college teammate and fellow pro wrestler, but I'll wait till we're talking about him to bring in this part.
Okay. Yeah, he's definitely on the list today. I wanted to get back into him because we haven't talked about him since like episode 1. We talked about you guys coming into the wrestling business, the professional wrestling business, and we really haven't mentioned him since that time. And here we are, 1975, and there he is in the results right in front of my face. So I'm like, wow, maybe this is a good time to jump back into this and see how things are going with old George and your memories of how far he evolved at this point. So we'll definitely be talking about him in this episode.
Let's talk about Mike first, because the stories with George are funny and positive, and Mike is, unfortunately, poor Mike, the opposite. His life ended in tragedy, and so we shouldn't start with levity, like fun and games, and then go to something so serious. But we do. Mike does deserve to be talked about. He's part of a famous family, and he had his own career and his own demons and all that. And I remember when I first started down there, Mike was probably in his late teens.
Now this is Mike Graham, just in case anybody. Graham. Right.
He was 18 when I started in '69. He wasn't working yet. A nice, nice looking kid. He had a problem, was that he was short. He was probably 5'8". He looked good. He was a little bit burly. He wasn't overweight or anything. And handsome. But, here he is, the son of Eddie Graham, who's one of the most visible people in Tampa in terms of being on TV. Hadn't been on TV for years. Of course, during my era, when I started, Eddie wasn't on there like every week. But in the earlier years, when they were building the business, he had been. Wrestling fans there had seen him and Malenko, Professor Malenko, had these classic battles for years. And not only on TV, of course, but to set up the matches in the arenas. Mm-hmm. So they knew Eddie Graham. He was highly visible. Plus, with the bleach blonde hair, the big gold watch with the gold pieces in the wristband, and tropical clothes. He was always tan. So Mike was following in big footsteps, which sometimes can be a problem. There's a similarity in the same time period of the family dynamic in pro wrestling. And one of them was Fritz von Erich and his kids, and you have Eddie Graham and his son and his grandson, that you see hideously tragic things happen. There's some similarities there. Austin Idol, I still think of him as Mike McCord. I've never been in his presence face to face with him in this other identity. I still remember him. I roomed with him in Australia for a couple months as Mike McCord. So McCord knew him. I'm not sure if he knew him growing up, but he was hanging around with him as a teenager. And McCord told me that he'd be over at Mike's house, and Mike would have some mail. He had some mail waiting he'd open up the mail, because what it was, they were dividend checks from stocks that Eddie had invested in Mike's name in the stock market. And he'd open these checks, and sometimes that could be $1,000, $1,200, or $400, or $100, whatever. But Mike, I'll give you another example of unbridled wealth. Mike had a Cadillac, our new Corvette, a beautiful car. He wrecked it one day, driving to a town or whatever. He wasn't hurt. The next day he had another one.
Wow.
He didn't wait to get that one fixed.
I'm assuming that wasn't his payoff to go buy another car.
Well, I'm sure he probably bought it with his own money. He probably didn't have to ask their dad to buy it. And maybe the car company or insurance company or whatever made arrangements with him. But usually you don't get a new car the next day.
Right.
You know what I mean? So he had all the accoutrements of wealth. So did the Von Erich boys. It's not good for you when you don't understand the value of money. I was talking a little bit earlier about not trying to waste a dollar because not having a lot of money to throw around.
Right.
And there's another time when my wife had a stroke. In order for us to qualify for Medicaid, to pay her hospital bill, which after 1 week were $29,000. 1 week. That was just a start. It was going to be somewhat near that for a month or two. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars for her care. She didn't have medical insurance. It just happened to be one of those freak things in between jobs. And so in order to pay for it, we needed to get Medicaid. In order to do that, we couldn't have any assets. So I put all our assets together, made them liquid, and spent the money. And it wasn't much. We weren't wealthy, but say 50, 60 grand. I had to spend it in like a week in order to qualify for the cutoff date.
Right.
And when you have unlimited money to spend, I was just looking for things to buy. I was looking for things. I'm telling you, when it's like that, the money doesn't mean anything. I mean, it's like worthless in a way because you have to get rid of it. So I've seen that. I only tell that story to say I know the difference between having it, not needing it, and needing it, not having it.
Right.
And don't need it that bad now. We're doing okay. Everything's fine. My youngest son just graduated from college with a degree in cybersecurity and networking. We're a lot of the same situation as a lot of other middle-class people in this country. Anyway, that unbridled ability to be able to buy anything you wanted is not good for a young kid. But I'm sure you had to struggle to buy things. You could go out and buy a Corvette for your first car, a new one, if you're really lucky. So to have all those assets, I think it puts your value in a weird place of what you consider valuable. And so anyway, Mike got in the business. Again, he had this problem of being Eddie Graham's son. He wasn't, he wasn't a Bruiser Brody. He was a smaller, not a very big guy. And a lot of times they had matches where he and his dad would be tag team. You're there and you're there in the same ring with a guy you're trying to
step out of the shadow of, in a way.
Yeah, you're out of the shadow, and there you are. Even though Eddie arranged it so that Mike would get a lot of the wins. And the other thing was Mike didn't want to go on the road, so he would work in Tampa, St. Pete, Lakeland, Sarasota. He didn't want to drive to Miami every week. He didn't want to drive to Jacksonville. He didn't want to drive to Tallahassee or Fort Lauderdale.
That did not fly in the professional wrestling world. Let's be clear, Bob, to everybody out there that may not understand that back then. You didn't tell the booker or the promoter what cities you're willing to work and what cities you weren't willing to work unless your name was maybe Duther Rove. And even he went and did the small town sometimes if he had to. And You're saying Mike was like, yeah, but I don't feel like doing this. How did that go over with the boys, like the guys that you were around? Obviously, you were in the heel locker room, but at the same time, I'm sure they're still chirping. Do you remember any conversations with anybody or anything? Did they resent Mike, or did everybody know to kind of mind their P's and Q's and watch what they say because it might get back to the boss?
Well, it's a good question, and I have to say that not because it wasn't happening, but because maybe I wasn't privy to it. I didn't hear much about that. And, and the other thing was, he wasn't a jerk in the dressing room. He didn't, I am the promoter's son, because, he was a smart enough kid. He wasn't a dummy. And so he understood his position. And, you're there, when you're there with guys that are legends like Johnny Valentine and, Dory Funk Jr. comes through as world champion. What are you going to go up and say, hey, I'm Mike Graham. Aren't you glad to meet me?
What does that mean to me, boy?
Yeah. So, and I'm sure Eddie, he needed it. Eddie gave him some kind of a way to tell him, like a behavior kind of a protocol on how to behave himself. But, he was okay. He was a decent talent. He didn't have a lot of fire. He wasn't somebody like, for example, Dusty. When Dusty got ready to make a comeback, whole building was full of anticipation. People were starting to yell, just waiting for him to smack that big elbow in somebody's face and start kicking butt. And Rocky Johnson, when he got ready to start his comeback, he started bouncing up and down and moving his fist around, and people would get the signal. He's getting ready to make a comeback, and they would respond. I mean, if he did that, nobody responded.
It was like an it factor. You see a lot of baby faces, that era, this era, what have you. They do the fire up. They clench the fists. They bend the arms. They flex those biceps. They run their hands through their hair. They're shouting and they're ready to go. But there's something missing. It's just not working. Even though they're going through the motions, the fans aren't believing it like they do a Dusty or Rocky. I don't know how to describe it. There's like an it factor there. Mike might have been doing all the right things, and it didn't really resonate as much with I'm not saying Mike wasn't over in Florida, guys. I'm not saying that at all. Mike got, had his time here in the 70s, even into the 80s. But at the same time, I see why Mike never made it to that next level. Not just the height issue, which Mike was on the shorter side, and later on he would have to be used humbly, I'm sure, as a junior heavyweight when he got a little work with WCW. But I totally get what you're saying in regards to he just didn't have that fire, that main event level fire. But I'm not trying to knock Mike Graham. Totally capable hand in the ring. Great baby face. That's very important, I think, when you're the boss's son and you're also being pushed as a talent in the ring, is don't walk around strutting around like a peacock, because that's going to get you all the heat in the world. It sounds like Mike he knew his role. Hey, I'm a worker too. And, he's just one of the boys.
Well, going back to your question a few minutes ago, if anybody said anything about it, I think if Mike had done that, now if Eddie had been in the dressing room, I know Eddie would have immediately enabled him, told him, hey, right, go over there by yourself or something. Don't do that. because Eddie didn't strut around the dressing room. You know, he was
Right.
was the boss. He was the one that made it pay off. That's why,
Yeah.
that's the one everybody's nice to. And so Mike was, you know, he was always appropriate. Let's put it that way. Now, outside the ring, he took liberties, and I don't want to go into detail. A lot of them had to do with girls and things but you know, he wasn't married yet. But he had the ability of being rich himself as a youngster, 21 years old, driving a Corvette, nice clothes, you know, had plenty of money. You know, he obviously, you know, he was nice looking. And he was on TV as a wrestler. You know, you had all the groupies around, and you have them in any popular, you know, music is very popular for groupies. And we talked about Chris Cole out in San Francisco having his pick. Well, Mike kind of had his pick too, and but some of the girls that he went with that also later on went with, or, you know, might have dated another other guy. The stories they had to tell weren't that nice about how he treated them. I mean, he didn't beat anybody up or anything, but he did what he wanted, and then he was just kind of, well, get out of my car or whatever.
Yeah, well, we've heard that story many a times with many a wrestler. It's unfortunate, but it seemed to be. It happened more often than not, unfortunately, with a lot of the boys and a lot of the young ladies. We'll just be polite and call them that here on the show. But it's unfortunate. I think anybody that ever heard a story like that can use their imagination and kind of get an idea of where you're going with it.
Again, having you know, just unlimited funds. Mike started his own business when he was young and was making good money with that. I'm not sure exactly what it was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm sure when his dad ended his life the way he did, that affected Mike strongly. I'm sure he depended on his dad for his emotional competence. I'm not sure if there was any other examples in the family, like grandpa or great-grandpa or anybody in the family that had committed suicide, but Mike had to start worrying about, you know, his own psyche and emotional health and that. Yeah, here you have a guy that's had everything. You know, most of his life, he's had everything he wanted in terms of possessions. Beautiful house, you know, you get married, you have kids, wife, kids, beautiful house, no worries about, you know, how the bills are going to get paid. And then you know, for some reason you find out that life you're not happy, you know, with yourself or your life or whatever. And you know, Mike's not the first one in that situation who apparently had everything and then ended their own life. Mm-hmm. He's not the first one. There's been many people who seem to have everything that did himself in, and everybody goes, well, why would they do that?
Well, I've heard the stories, you know, about Mike, and, you know, you talk about after Eddie passed away, just his own psyche and whatnot. I don't remember who told this story. It might have been Kevin Sullivan, but I'm not positive. But there was a period there where Mike, you know, they had sold Eddie's Boys Ranch. I don't know if that was the late 80s or what time period that was, but Mike showed them a check for $600,000 they got for the ranch. Mike acquired all of that money. That was his money. And you would think when I'm showing you a $600,000 check, I'm going to have a smile on my face. But Mike just kind of showed it in passing, like, yeah, this is what I got for it. Nothing seemed to make him happy at that point in his life from the stories I've heard. And I don't know if that had anything to do with Eddie's passing or that was just Mike's mentality on life in general by that point.
Do you know what he got for selling all the Florida tapes, the wrestling, the TV tapes?
Yeah, I have no idea what he got through that with Vince McMahon.
I think it was a couple of million, that's what I heard. Again, I just what I heard, so you have no way of knowing what's true.
Right.
But I wouldn't be surprised. But McMahon was making millions by that time every week, and he was trying to buy up all the wrestling tapes in the country.
Yeah.
So, and to get those Florida tapes, you know, would be everybody in the world worked down there. You know, I mean, he's one of the top guys in the world. Mike and I butted heads when I started booking it the last time. Eddie had passed away; it was gone. And Mike, all the bookers before me, Wahoo was the one directly before me. Wahoo McDaniel had been a booker. I took over from him, and I told a story. It was supposed to be Kevin, but Kevin disappeared when he shouldn't have. And not for long, but Matsuda couldn't get in touch with him. Mm-hmm. And TV tape would need to be made the next day, and Kevin didn't do Kevin had gone out of town to work for another promoter for a couple of days. he didn't call Matsuda to let him know what was going on. So when Hero couldn't find him, Hero actually came to my house, knocked on the door, and came in and asked me. He said, we need a TV by tomorrow. Can you have one ready? I said, yes. So I became the booker. So and that's a simple, Kevin gave it up by his own lack of thought, responsibility, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But Mike had been used to being Wahoo and everybody else, especially when Eddie was alive. They would book Mike any way he wanted. If Mike say, "Look, I want to go to Sarasota every time you book it, or Lakeland," that way, he can get out of the house, he can go have a match, and if he wants to play around, I'm not saying he did it to play around, but if that's what he wanted to do, he could. Mm-hmm. But when I started booking, if I added Mike to the card, I was going to have to add another body, or either that or leave one of the regulars off. And all these guys that were the regular guys, they weren't making a lot of money, and a $50 payoff was a major part. If you were making $300, well, $50 is a pretty good piece of it, And mm-hmm. So I couldn't book Mike, and I told him, I let him know face to face. Look, I've nothing personal. I've got no problem with you. We don't know each other very well, but you're all set financially. I said, these guys I'm booking, if I book you, I have to let one of them off, or I have to hire somebody else for you to work with. And Duke Kiyomuka and Hiro Matsuda, then the directors of the company, the bosses, had told me not to, keep the card small, use just the guys we got, not to put up any additional expenses. Both those guys mortgaged their house, their personal home.
Kiyomuka and Matsuda.
And mortgaged their homes to keep the company going.
Wow.
And about 6 months after I started, they were able to pay off the loan because they called me in their office and handed me a bottle of wine to celebrate. And they thanked me. It was their company, of course, but we had done good business, and I'd been working hard, and they were good guys. And I knew them both, and called me in and thanked me. And what happened is when our business got to the point where it looked like they might have to do that again, we had a slow month. That was when they got worried, and that's when my ending came. But before that happened, for that year I did work, I would see Mike every so often at Tampa. He would come to the matches, and he would be in the hall with Gordon Soley. Gordon and I had our problems at that time.
Sure.
And Buddy Cole. And Buddy and I had not problems, but Buddy kept trying. You remember what we said? I said He had this problem with Kendall Wonder for some reason. I have no idea why. But so these guys would be in the hall. They see me coming, and they all stop talking, and then they get a little closer, and they all be looking at me. All three of them, they look at me. They wouldn't say anything. I went by. As soon as I got, what they thought was out of range, they start talking again. You talk about guys telling you, without saying a word, telling you what the hell they're talking about. I kind of laughed at it because, but the night I got canned, what a horrible, horrible situation. I went to Orlando. I had Lex Luger with me. I took him with me, but he drove. When I got there, Danny Miller was there, and Danny said, Bobby, and I had an idea. The time was come. I was ready for it. And Danny said, Bobby, you've been let go. Well, I would have gone home immediately, of course, if I was driving. I just told Luger get another ride. But I couldn't even go home, and I wasn't running that show. I was through. And who was there? Mike Graham. And he had cowboy boots on, so he's a couple inches taller, and he's strutting around, nice big belt buckle, tiny belt buckle, like a guy who won the bucking bronco or the Brahma bull riding at the rodeo. What I did is I went, we were in Orlando. So anyway, I went to the other side of the building and set up in the bleachers and just watched the matches. But when it came time to go, and I saw Luger had gone back in the dressing room. I waited about, after his match, I figured he'd be about 15 minutes. I waited, and then I started heading over that way. And Mike was waiting for me. And he came up, and I don't say he's strutting, but, he came up and said, well, I'm running things down. I said, well, good luck. I hope you can do well. You got a lot of guys depending on you. And, what was I going to say? I didn't have a problem with it. I had gotten to the point where I was drinking pretty heavy. I haven't been a drinker for 15 years now, so I can talk about it. But I was drinking to the point, it was the one thing in my life that definitely did not respect myself for. I was beating myself up a lot about it, but the stress, I wasn't doing drugs, although alcohol is a drug. So it was, and you know what? Within a week, I wasn't drinking anymore. I wasn't drinking heavy. Yeah, and when I went to my parting thing with Hero, I went to the office, and he thanked me, shook my hand. I think he gave me $3,000. It's like a severance pay. I left on good terms with him. I worked with him later. I provided him a Global Wrestling Alliance tapes, and I provided him those. He copied them, and he was sending them to Japan. He paid me for them at $300 for each one. But, I liked Hero. I didn't have a problem with them. The business is a business. It's not personal.
Right.
So
every booker's time comes to an end at some point.
Yes. And if you're smart, you know that. You go to them. Say, look, I think it's time we make a move. I'm kind of worn out. And then that was the last I saw of Mike, except through the media. I saw that the things where I thought about him selling the tapes after they went out of business and, various things. And I heard about him taking his own life. And, it's tragic. But you think about it, him and the Von Erich boys, they've got everything. And I'm sorry, I get my soapbox out a little bit. People think that money is the end all, but it's not. It can be a killer. Mike had everything from the time he was born, I guess. And, in the end, it wasn't enough. So
it's a really odd, absolutely tragic tale, but you think about Eddie Graham taking his life in the mid-'80s, and then somewhere around 2010 or so, I think it was, but Mike Graham's own son took his life, same way with the gun. And Mike has lost his father, and he's lost his son. And I do remember Kevin Sullivan telling this story, something like Mike saying that I must have been an awful father and I must have been an awful son. Mike basically blaming himself for the passing of Eddie Graham and his own son. And it's crazy, the mental health that's involved in these things. And I'm not trying to deep dive into any of that, but 2 years after Mike's son takes his life, Mike takes his own as well. And also Kevin said, and I don't know if this is, true information or not. I didn't do any digging. I wouldn't even know how to find the truths into this, but Kevin Sullivan said that he found out much later after Mike passed away that Eddie Graham's father also took his life.
There you go.
And if that's the truth, that's insane. You're talking 4 generations of people who committed suicide.
I didn't know about the dad, but I'm not surprised. There is a genetic tendency in that for some reason. I don't know what. Maybe there's a part of your psyche, your psychological makeup, that there's one room that has suicide all over it. You happen to have a bigger room than most. You got a whole suite of rooms where everybody might get a feeling sometime in their life like life worth living and all that. But I've never gotten there yet, thank God. But with Mike, it really is a shame. And I think that Mike having and the Von Erich boys, I think everything handed to him. I don't know if Eddie was like Fritz Von Erich, where Fritz, the way that he got on his son and came and basically said, okay, boys, this is what we're going to do. Kerry, you're going to do this. David, you're going to do that. And by the time one of them said, but hey, I broke my ankle, or the other one said, yeah, well, my back's killing me. Fritz was on his way back to the house to have a beer or something. He didn't want to hear any of that stuff. So by the time that, those guys got down the end of the road, here they got everything. That old saying, a songbird trapped in a gilded cage. You're in a cage made out of gold. You're getting the best food in the world, but you're in a cage.
Right.
You can't get out. You can't fly. And you're a bird. You want to fly. That's what birds do. So for human beings, I think it creates the same kind of problem. You're in a cage, you got everything. It seems like you got everything, but you're miserable. And I think also when everything's handed to you, how do you build your self-worth? If your father treats you like somebody who seems to be not confident that you can make it on your own, what does that tell you? Your dad doesn't have confidence in you. Well, why should you have confidence in yourself? Again, I'm doing Dr. Psychobabble here. Forgive me out there, but it's just, again, I've been around a while. It's just my thought. it just distorts the reality in a way that's not healthy. Bless, rest in peace, Mike and Eddie. I didn't know Eddie's father. I'm sorry your lives took a turn like that. And sometimes, I'm not sure, but sometimes it might be that kind of a psychological aberration in your makeup that drives you to do things like Eddie did, to become successful, to, become a successful wrestler, not just a wrestler, but a promoter. And maybe he got to the end. We talked in a past show about his problems with his girlfriend and breaking up with her, and he had gone back in the bottle. So one thing alcohol is, it's a depressant. You drink alcohol, you're going to be depressed. So adding that to all his other problems, it's not so hard to see with Eddie. Mike, I don't know if he was drinking or not when he passed away, but what seems to be, again, what you see is not what you get. What looks to be ideal. Oh, I wish I'd been born the son of a wrestling promoter or the son of a rich man where I had a car. As soon as I got my driver's license, I had a new Corvette. Oh, that would be all great and everything. Maybe with some people, maybe it would. Maybe it'd be great. In this case, it wasn't. And
right.
Fortunately, we have a lot of happy stories about the wrestling business, about people who got in it, who didn't have anything when they got into it and made a life. Made a life.
There's a lot of those stories because a lot of people that found wrestling, not necessarily you were the exception to the rule. The rule seemed to be a lot of guys really didn't know what they were doing in life, and they kind of fell into the professional wrestling business. Maybe they got hurt trying to go pro in a sport, or maybe they had no education, and this was the way they had to do. So a lot of guys broke in the carny scene and things like that. Of course, not everyone fell into it that way, but a lot of guys did, and many of them made, names for themselves, made money that way, and a lot of people spent all that money that way, but that's another story for another day. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting world, professional wrestling, especially back in this Wild West day of the territory era. So we talked here about Mike at the beginning of the show. You talked about, let's kind of uplift everybody because you got some stories about someone you had known for quite a while, probably, I guess, longer than any other wrestling talent in the business, and that's your old college buddy, right? George McCreary.
Right, George McCreary. George was on the Southern Illinois University wrestling team at the same time I was there. We were on 3 years together. We wrestled together in dual meets and national tournament and that sort of thing. And George was always a really funny guy. I mean, he wasn't a jokester per se. He had this way of, well, I told a story, I'll tell it again. He was working, and the way George had his own business, he and his wife had a gift shop that started out a little 10-foot wide shop between bigger shops in Saluda, North Carolina. And that's where they started selling their little, and what they would do, they would go down to Mexico in the off season because in the wintertime, you didn't have a lot of tourists going through there. So their season would be from probably April through maybe November that they would be open. They'd have their shop open. A lot of tourists went through there. They would go down to Mexico in the off season and they would pick up all kinds of trinkets and things for, on the cheap. And they'd bring it back and they would sell that. And then George started making stuff. Well, over the years, they saved their money and they were frugal and all that. And they ended up buying a piece of property that was great, about like 3 or 4 acres, right by the highway. But what happened, it had a slope that looked like you couldn't build on it. What they were able to do was they were able to pull in fill dirt to level the main part, and they pushed all that dirt down the hill and shored it up to where they had enough room to build. They built a big shop and opened it up, and within 5 years, they were grossing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Well, let's go back to when they first started. I used to go up there and see them. They had a house right on a lake, nothing fancy, just a nice little house, 3 or 4 bedroom. But I knew both of them from college. We had fun together. They were right on a lake, and you could go out and swim and fish, whatever you wanted, but they were just good company. Well, when George got into business, or I told this story before, but it bears repeating, George was working against somebody on TV, it doesn't matter. And Louis Tillett was the booker. I was helping Louis. And Louis came up to George and he was doing George a favor. Instead of just telling him what he wanted to do, he was doing him the courtesy of asking, George, you're going against Billy Jack. We really want to get him over, George. George, we really want to get him over, George. What do you think we should do, George? We really want to get him over. And George gets his deadpan face. Had a little belly. If he stuck it out, he stuck out his little belly. Got this deadpan face. He said, well, I could give up on the handshake. Well, he had to be there, I guess. But,
No, absolutely.
I could give up on a handshake. I laughed. But the other one that was funny, in Fort Lauderdale, we had separate dressing rooms, and I think it was Corsica Jean was the referee, but I sent a finish over. No, George was in my dressing room. I sent it to the other side. George was supposed to win the match for the sunset flip. So Corsica Jean went and told the babyface. So they got to the time of the finish. George, the finish had 2 or 3 parts to it. So I was watching. I was glad to see it went well. George flips his opponent, and the guy kicks out.
Oh, wow.
So they go back and mess around a little bit. George was quick enough. He ended up throwing the kid in. The kid sunset flipped him and got a 1, 2, 3. What happened was George had always done jobs. So when Corsica Jean went over to tell the kid that he was supposed to tell him that George was going to be the one winning the match, he told the other kid, you're going to do a sunset flip on George.
Man, now I really wonder who that kid was. I'd like to try to pinpoint when that happened. That's a good one. So basically, Corsica Jean is at fault because they gave the wrong finish, but they were so used to George doing the job, they just assumed that's what they heard.
Yeah. Well, another story with George. When he and his wife came down. He was booked for a couple weeks. He'd call me like a month in advance. I get him booked for a couple weeks. Sometimes not every night. Maybe just Tampa and Fort Lauderdale, not Lauderdale, but maybe close towns. Where you make a few bucks. And they were staying with me, so there was no expense there. And so one night we're riding back. We'd been, I don't know, Sarasota someplace. We're riding back to my place. And I just remember that night, something about a tape that had to be in Jacksonville. And Gordon needed to change something, Gordon Soley. And here it is. It's like a Saturday night. And I'm thinking, I stopped the car. I'm going to call Gordon. It's like 11:30 at night. And I thought, wait a minute. He can't get to a studio to do anything about it till Monday. And it needs to be done by Monday, but there's nothing to do about it tonight. So I got back in the car, and so I'm bothered by it because it's a problem if we don't get it fixed. We're just driving along, and beautiful night, stars all in the sky. And George said, Bob, look up there. And he's pointing up through the windshield. And he said, look at the sky. And I looked up there, millions of stars everywhere, clear night. He said, look at that, Bob, look at that. He said, with all that up there, how important do you think your problem is, whatever it is? How important do you really think it is? And I thought about it. I said, man, it's so true. Because in the scheme of things, mine was minor league. We could get it fixed. So, but I appreciate that wisdom and from a guy that, could be a clown. I mean, yeah, he was a good teammate, good friend. And after they worked there for a week, they went down to Grand Cayman for a week or two of snorkeling and scuba diving, where it was the off season. I think they could get in there for like $100, $200 a week, room and everything. So, I started thinking, wait a minute. Later that year, I said, okay, I had to borrow. I made $50,000 that year, which was a big year for me. I had to borrow money to pay my taxes, and I thought, here's George and Kathy are down in the Caymans, and I borrowed money to pay my taxes. I worked like a dog this last year. Who's got the right idea here? Those two or me? Yeah, but George he wasn't cut out to be a full-time. The way he did it was fine. He was laid back, and he had a hand in it. He was good. He was a good hand.
I think you even gave him some work up in Knoxville when you were booking there too. It looks like he came through there. Yeah,
they were much closer to North Carolina. Was closer to Knoxville than Florida. Right. So, yeah, good guy, good hand, great amateur too. I got to tell another George McCreary story.
Sure.
It was a college match. It was a Missouri Valley Conference tournament, and George went out there, I think he was wrestling 177. And he went out there, and the guy that came across from the other side, black kid, and he probably had about a 25-inch waist. His shoulders were about a yard wide. He had great big arms, big legs. George looked like he just got out of Dachau or someplace. He had a straight up and down body. Now, he had this deceptive strength. He was strong, but he didn't look it. And he kind of slumped as he walked out there. If you were evaluating the match beforehand, if you did a still and asked people to bet on who was going to win the match, I think about 95% of people would have picked the black kid because he just looked like he could pick George up and just tear him apart. So the match started, and while they're shaking hands before the match, they're looking at each other. George has got his little belly sticking out. He actually looked like he was about to fall down and pass out. He went out there and he fed the guy a hand. In other words, he stuck a hand out, like right in front of the guy. The guy grabbed him by the wrist and was going to show him his grip and his power. And that's the lead into a move called an arm drag. Not the pro kind, but an amateur kind, where you grab the guy's arm, you pull him right by you on your left, and you trip him on the way by. And when he trips, he's down on his hands and knees. And what they normally do, they go down so fast, they try to turn back around to face you, to be facing you again. The guy turned around. George reached through his legs and up around his neck and cradled him and rolled over on his back and pinned him in 7 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. He got back up. He's standing there again with his little belly hanging out. He's got this look on his face like he's apologetic. Like, I'm so sorry I did that. I hope you're not upset. He's got his hand stuck out. Oh, man. Oh, you talk about surprise. It surprised me, yeah. I mean, I knew he was good. Hell, he worked out with me sometimes.
Right, yeah.
When there's nobody else. But, yeah, he's...
Well, don't judge a book, right? Especially in combat.
Not in amateur wrestling. It's not strength. That's helpful, but that's not the end all. So, okay, enough on George.
No, yeah, it was good. It was good catching up with him and just kind of figuring out what happened with him because, without going through here, I didn't realize that he came, he was here with you in Florida in the mid-'70s, and we'll see him continue to pop up wherever Bob Roop may go sometimes anyway, in Knoxville. Yeah. That's very kind of you to keep your buddy around who's a capable hand. Yeah, George McCreary, it's good to hear about him. We haven't really talked about him, I think, since episode 1 or 2. So it's always good to catch back up with some of these guys and see what they're doing here several years later. So Bob Roop, working main events, he's a booker, and poor old George, he can't even get a win when he's supposed to. But that's the rest.
Imagine having a friend and someone from street life,
Yeah.
Being a regular civilian and going to pro wrestling. You're going in the loony bin madhouse in a way. I mean, we talked about, Chris Colt and, Terry Garvin and, all the guys out there are super flamboyant and bigger than life. And where's reality? And, George was like a step back into reality. It was nice to have someone that I could relate to from before,
right.
Back way when. So that was nice.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, where we go, what we do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop, Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Pro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Pro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron. I'm talking about that $5 all access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. We also offer remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show, covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series, covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. And for those who like all of their podcasts in one nice, neat little pile, the WrestleCopia Patreon also offers a Patreon exclusive Spotify account. You can actually go over to your Spotify with your WrestleCopia Patreon credentials. Instead of listening or downloading directly from Patreon, you can go over to Spotify, listen to all the latest shows, including all of the early releases. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come. We were talking about some names off air, and during this time period, 1975, one of the youngsters at the time who traveled through the territory was a French-Canadian by the name of Rick Martel. A lot of people remember Martel for his WWF runs in the mid-'80s. He was two-time tag team champion with Tony Gurria in the early '80s in New York, came back, teamed with Tom Zenk, teamed with Tito Santana, won the tag titles again, and eventually he gets to turn heel. He does the model gimmick. He's the model, Rick Martel. Good-looking guy. He got it over. And for a guy who seemed such a good human being outside of the business, he was a natural heel in the ring. He did a great job with that gimmick from the late 80s through the mid-90s, working for the WWF, and always in great shape. And one of my favorite performers of all time. I asked you off air, I said, do you remember anything about Rick Martel? And the one thing you said was, well, I remember they played a rib on him. And I said, hey, save it for the show. I don't want to know. So we're going to open it up right now. I was going to ask you the rib that was played on Rick Martel here back in Florida.
Okay, he was riding with some veteran baby faces, and they set it up with a couple of the heels that were in another car. And so they were coming back, I think it was from Jacksonville, over to Tampa, back to our home base. Mm-hmm. And what they did is they set it up where the heels and the babyface, they passed each other a few times on the way. And so one time, the way they set it up Well, every time they went by, they mooned them. The heels would moon them. And they did it twice. Then they slow down, let the baby faces drive by, and then they go by them again and moon them. So the baby faces, and this was all set up. So the baby faces got ahead. What happened, the way they got ahead, the heels pulled over and put up the hood of the over the engine like they're having engine trouble. So the baby faces went by. As soon as the car went by, the heels put the hood down where you could see that they were getting ready to start again. And so they said, now they're going to be coming up on us pretty soon now. They've mooned us twice now. They're going to go by. Let's do this. Take your clothes off and get out and stand on the side of the highway like you're hitchhiking. We're going to go up to the road. There's a road up here about half a mile. We're going to go up there and we're going to pull down there. And as soon as they go by, we see them go by, we'll come back and get you. Well, Martel went for it for some reason. And so he got his clothes off. He's sitting out there on the highway. He should have got a clue because he told me later, this all came out during the interviews where all the boys were together a couple of days later. Then when they went by, both the heels in the front seat and the back seat were mooning him as they went by, like they knew he would be waiting. That should have clued him off right there. They go by, so Martel's waiting, and the big faces come back. They go down a little ways, they turn around, they come back by, like they stop 20 yards ahead of him, open the door, he goes up to get it, and they take off. They take off, and they do that about 3 times, and then they just take off and leave him.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. He's out there on the side of the road naked.
How did he get to the next stop?
They came back.
Oh, did they? Well,
yeah, after a while. They let them all hang loose out there for about 10 minutes, and they came back and got him.
Well, at least he was a model, right? So
yeah,
he looked good, I guess.
Well, you know what? He was able to laugh about it. You know, his brother probably would have killed a few people. I heard his brother was a hothead, but
yeah,
he was able to laugh
I know they were night and day as far as personalities went. So yeah. Plus his brother not so pretty. I think Rick Martel got all the looks in that family. So.
Oh, he wasn't. You imagine a tag now, a 3-man tag. Him and Buddy Landell and the kid from Houston.
Gino
Hernandez. Those 3, my God, what a tag team, huh? 3 of them?
Yeah, in their primes. Absolutely.
Oh, well, I mean, oh, God, you talk about handsome. I mean, anyway, yeah, that was my only contact with Rick. I don't think I worked with him. I don't remember it. But then again, I came across some matches where I was tag teams with Bruiser Brody. I was tag teams with Abby.
Right.
I don't remember them. I don't think I've ever been tag team with Andre. You know, I've worked against him several times, but if I was tag teams with him and forgot him, I might have a mental problem here.
Right.
But, yeah.
We did a lot of psyche talking when it came to Mike Graham, so I really don't want to go into the psyche or the semantics of the art. We talked about the art of the blade job last episode, and so my next name on my list here that's going to come up was very familiar with the blade, and that's Abdullah the Butcher. You said you don't remember teaming with him here, so that answers that question. It was a one-off, so I could see why, and I'm not saying you never teamed with Abby again, but that's where we're at here in the summer of 75. You have one tag team match where you team with Abdullah. Do you have any stories about Abby or anything like that?
Yeah, I've got one. I might have told it before, but it bears repeating. He was working against Buzz Sawyer in Atlanta. And
wow, there's a match.
Yeah. And you know what? Their match lasted about 15 minutes. And if they were in the ring 30 seconds at that time, I'm surprised. They fought up and down the aisles, which to me is insane. I don't know how Abby went for it. You know, Buzz was believe it or not, Buzz was a babyface. You know, him and Brett fought against they wrestled the Road Warriors all the time, which is a great match. You know, I mean, because Buzz was hard, he was like your Dick the Bruiser type babyface.
Yeah.
You know, he was as nasty as you could be. But, you know, poor Brett, his younger brother, about half his size.
Yeah.
Especially when Buzz does things like challenge the Road Warriors. Me and my brother will take on you two guys. Brisco, hey, wait a minute. Just a second on that one. I'm going to go check the oil in my car. If I'm not back, just go ahead without me. Yeah.
Well, Buzz would have gave it a go with or without Brett.
I was sitting up in the audience watching. They beat each other. I don't know how. It's so dangerous for a heel to be fighting outside the ring and the audience, because the cops weren't around them. The cops weren't protecting them.
Right.
So I don't know. Abby probably was confident. He probably had 2 or 3 blades somewhere on him. So maybe he felt like he was protected. But now I was never in a car with Abby. I was never in a bar with Abby. Let me think. All I knew was that he was a very good businessman. He made a fortune in Japan.
He sure did.
He invested it in property around Atlanta, is my understanding. So where he was and still is a very wealthy man. Now, the year after I got inducted into the Hall of Fame out in Wichita Falls, Abby got inducted the next year, and I went that year too. We drove the first year, heck of a drive. The second year we took the train, and then we decided not to go back anymore. But Abby was out there. I got to talk to him a little bit, but not much. Completely different guy from the ring guy. He's a regular human being when you're talking to him. Intelligent guy.
Yeah, Abby's quite a career. He worked a lot up here in the Cleveland territory, and when he was in his younger, I guess you could call it thinner days, back in the late 60s, beginning of the 70s. And I saw that you had this match here, and it's very similar to a match that's out there on YouTube with you. And I hope a lot of people had the time to drop by YouTube and look up some of those matches I referenced last week with you, and to see not just what great shape you're in, but just the master bumper that you were. I mean, you were feeding all around the ring for the baby faces in those matches. And one of those matches was you teaming with Harley Race against Cyclone Negro and Rocky Johnson, because your summer is going to be a very storied feud with Rocky Johnson. You guys do every gimmick match possible, and you bring in a slew of tag team partners. One of them was Abby against Cyclone and Rocky, and one of them was Harley. That match is on YouTube, and we're not there yet as far as your feud with Rocky Johnson, but I did find something else very interesting, and it leads into your feud with Rocky, or it will set it. It doesn't necessarily set it up, but it's what you were doing prior to, at least in West Palm. And it starts in the month of April, and it goes all the way through the end of June. A feud with Terry Funk in West Palm Beach, Bob Roop and Terry Funk. Now, it had been Dick Slater and Mongolian Stomper. Stomper was the level above you in Gary Hart's Army at this point. He was the main event. You were the number 2. And Stomper leaves the Loser Leaves Town match right around the end of April in 75. And then Bob Roop becomes the whole show, the real deal here. And you take over the main events, and you work a feud with Terry Funk. And week after week, I Quit match, Russian chain match, steel cage match. And it all culminates in a regular match. And people out there are going, why? It was a number 1 contenders match to see who would wrestle Jack Brisco for the World Heavyweight title.
That's
so
right.
After all of the blood feud, Bob, after everything's said and done, you guys were bleeding all over the place, no doubt. I Quit, Russian chain, steel cage.
Oh, yeah.
You come back for a epic singles encounter, but it's for the most important prize in the world. It's for a shot at Jack Brisco in that NWA World Heavyweight title. And obviously the footage isn't out there. I wish it was. But clearly Bob Roop defeats Terry Funk in the results here, and thus the next week you receive that world title shot. Now, obviously you don't go on to beat Jack Brisco, but and you have to be making money to bring this back. What is it, 10 weeks in a row, Bob Roop versus Terry Funk in some way, shape, or form?
Right. I'm looking at the dates of May 5th, May 12th, May 26th, June 2nd, June 9th, June 16th. The thing is, even coming back with that, without the gimmicks, the cage and the brass knucks or the Russian chain and the I Quit and all that, Terry was such a good worker. Our matches were good. Our matches were had to be pleasing to fans. And I had people in the audience I had the boys tell me, good match. Terry had great timing, but most of the time when we worked, we didn't have to talk much. If I thought of something to do and he was in the right place, I might, say something to him or just go ahead and get him and do it, or vice versa. But after a couple of matches, we we were comfortable enough with each other. We didn't have to worry about it. We were both able to react to what the other one was doing. But the matches were very good. Stomper's matches, not to knock Archie. Archie was a good worker and all that. But his matches were just that, a lot of stomping and knee chopping. He very seldom got a hold. And so Terry and I we usually went 30 minutes at least. And we had holds and we told a story. And I think that's what kept our audience coming back, because they knew if nothing else, they were going to get a good match. Even if they weren't going to like the results, whatever they saw to get those results, they were going to enjoy. And that it seemed to work out that way, because we wouldn't keep coming back. Now, I was booking West Palm, but Terry and I were booking our match. I was deferring to him. I said this before on another show, but here's a guy who was born into wrestling. I'm not going to listen to him. And Terry wasn't pushy anyway. He didn't come and say, "Oh, Bob, listen, we're going to do it my way or the highway." He just, he was very collegial, very smart guy. I think I've told this one before too, but it's still the one I enjoy. Terry has such a great personality, and he had these personas that he could put on. He could put on this hail fellow well met, the friendliest guy in the world. He'd be in the dressing room telling a joke, and he'd be talking about this story and laughing about this story. And then he'd tell some story that would be about all the promoters stealing money. And he'd do this when the promoters were in the dressing room. I remember Graham and Fuller and Welch were on the dressing room one time, and maybe Dory Sr. too. And he was telling a story about a promoter stealing money, and in some way that it was funny, and laughing. And I looked at Eddie Graham, he's laughing. But Terry just said, "Yeah, oh, the promoter steal money." They're all laughing. I thought, well, man, that's a talent, because he was insulting.
Yeah.
These guys are all thieves. He's insulted the hell out of them.
That's a completely different hold than an office hold. That's just the funk hold.
He could get away with it. I mean, if he'd have said deadpan, "You're all thieves," well, he was a promoter too. He and the brother and his dad promoted Amarillo, but they paid pretty good, I think. But yeah, Terry was a lot of fun to work with.
Mm-hmm.
I know he enhanced my expertise. I was a lot smarter and more capable after just working with him a couple of months. It was like an amateur wrestling, working with Jim Raschke, working out with that guy who'd been third in the world, Baron von Raschke, at Greco-Roman wrestling. I worked out with him for 2 months. And when I went to compete in the Olympic trials, I was at that level.
Right.
I wasn't as good as him, but I had 10 minutes in me. That was enough. And that's all matches were 10 minutes. So the same thing of working with Terry and pro. You learn a whole different thing. You learn psychology. There's not much psychology in amateur wrestling, but it's just tough. There is some, but not like in pro. Where you're telling a story with every part of your body, and other guys too.
It's very important, though. I don't want to dismiss this. At least 10 weeks in a row, you work with Terry on top in the same city, and this is weekly, guys. So to come back every week in West Palm Beach and draw enough that, obviously nobody's changing plans here, because let's be real. Nobody's going to book the same 2 guys in the ring against one another every week unless it's working, unless it's drawing money, unless the crowd's coming in there. And clearly you guys, I'm not, obviously Terry Funk's involved, so that goes without saying anyway, but obviously you guys were drawing the crowd. You guys were bringing the people back time after time here until the story is done. You get that title shot with Jack Brisco, and then you're going to move on to Rocky Johnson for the rest of the summer. But I marvel in the fact that, people don't think about that back then. It's not visiting a town every month or even bi-weekly. This is every week you guys are going out there, and these people have to see the same 2 guys out there, and it's not getting old. You guys find a way to bring it up every week. You start with a disqualification, you go on to a draw, then Bob Roop steals a normal victory over, I'm sure you cheated somewhere in there, but you score a pinfall victory over Terry that leads to several gimmick matches, which leads to the number 1 contender match. Before Terry moves on, you get your title shot. You don't succeed there, and then you go on to feud with Rocky Johnson thereafter. And it's masterful storytelling week to week to week. That takes a lot of work as a booker.
Well, it does. And, Harley left it entirely to me. Harley was running Orlando that night. Dusty Dusty was booking himself. Well, Dusty always wanted to go to Orlando. Yeah,
sure, it's a bigger town.
Yeah, well, it's a short drive, too.
Okay.
West Palm Beach is 240, and Orlando's about 90. So
there you go.
Dusty never worked for me in West Palm. So, but the Terry and I could go down there and do well. I mean, we didn't sell out, and Dusty might have. It depended on who we were working against. Dusty didn't always sell out either, unless he had an angle going. Mm-hmm. He'd always draw pretty well. He was like his name recognition.
Yeah.
He was over. People believed in him, and they didn't do the kind of angles with him where they left him laying and bleeding in the ring, like they might do with another babyface. They never needed to do that with Dusty, at least not. Only if they did, it was only ever so often.
Right.
I got a story I want to tell, a little different story about Jack Brisco. When Jack was getting ready to be champion, Buddy Fuller had the idea of putting Jack on TV, making Jack out to be a tough guy. When you and I talked about Chris Colt and Don Fargo, especially Fargo, working down there in Alabama and those places, mm-hmm. where in the South where blood and guts and, not a lot of psychology, not a lot of subtlety, but just meat chopping, blood and guts. Fargo would go in there and just, be bleeding and axe murder and all that kind of stuff. Buddy Fuller brought that. He was floating over there. He brought that kind of mentality to Florida with him. And Eddie Graham, for some reason, would go along with some of the stuff he did. I don't know why, but he did. Buddy had this idea of making Jack a tough guy. He wanted him to be a tough babyface. He had the idea, they're going to do this on TV for the first time in Jack's career. They want Jack the hard way, this guy he's working with, to bust him open for real. Not a blade, not cut him, but hit him in the eye and bust him open. And Jack was reluctant to do it. I was there when they were trying to tell him about it. I was close enough to be able to hear what they were saying. Jack said, well, I've never done it before. They said, oh, it's easy. And they showed him a couple of times, how to do it. So he went out there. Some guy, I never saw him before that day. I never saw him after. Some poor guy. Jack hit him 17 times. After about the second or third one, here's your lead babyface. The other guy hadn't done anything to him, really. And Jack's punching him and holding him and like deliberately punching him right on the eye over and over and over again. And after about the third or fourth one, all of a sudden people got quiet. And after about the 10th one, they started booing. Jack, like, what are you doing? And the only reason he busted the guy open was that the guy's face, his temple and his cheek, it filled with fluid. It swelled up to the point. And when Jack hit it, the thing broke. Now think about that. It's ghastly. Disgustingly nauseating to even think about. But they had the idea, here you got a great baby face that's already drawing like crazy. And you're going to go out there and do some crap like that to enhance him, to make him better? Oh, man. You talk about lousy booking. That was an aberration. That didn't happen very often. We talked about fun stuff and funny stuff.
Yeah.
But some of the stuff they did, some of that stuff, the blood and guts stuff, I'm not sure it was necessary. A lot of places got along or do just fine without it.
I think there's a time and a place for it. Like you and Funk, for instance, after 3 or 4 weeks of working one another, you guys go to I would call it blood and guts, Russian chain, steel cage type right. situations. But you build to that. There's a reason for it. And I see what you're right. saying in regards to trying to make Jack Brisco a tough guy baby face. And right. it's kind of odd to do after Jack had been there for as long as he had already, to try to reestablish him as a completely different type of personality or baby face. So I'm assuming, needless to say, they just kind of went back to the old school Jack Brisco the following week.
Oh yeah, they tried. Well,
I'm sure anybody who watched that, did that air? Did that make air on TV?
That's a good question. I was just thinking of that. I think it did. I don't know why they would. It seems to me like me they'd bury it.
Because I'm thinking as a fan, and if I'm watching weekly and I know my Jack Brisco and I see this, you would think that would be embedded in your mind for the rest of time, right? Like, what the hell was that? Kind of traumatize a kid instead of getting Jack over as a tough guy.
Oh, yeah. He looked like a bully. And the kid wasn't big. The kid wasn't very big. He was
right.
smaller than Jack. So yeah, it was just idiocy. And poor Jack. He told me later he was just nauseated even having to do it, and he was pissed off. He never had much use for Fuller after that. In fact, Buddy made a mistake. Jack and I started playing when I was still a babyface. We started playing racquetball, and it was a good way to work out. And he knew how to play, and I mean he'd played before, and so we'd play, and it was good. It was a good workout rather than jogging on the beach, because first of all the racquetball court's private. There's nobody watching. So Buddy decided he found out that we were hearing us talking about it. He basically told us he wanted to join us. He didn't ask us. Mm-hmm. He said, "Hey," he didn't say, "Hey, you want a third party?" They said, "Hey, what time you guys gonna do that? I'm gonna come join you." Well, we what could we say? I think he was doing the payouts at the time too. So yeah, well he did, and for some reason, as much control as Jack and I both had, somehow, racquetball. I don't know if you ever played, but racquetball. Well, a guy hits the ball. Usually, when you're chasing it, you're behind the guy who hit the ball. Mm-hmm. He's waiting for you to return it. He's not watching you. He's watching the front wall to see where the ball's going to go. So, Buddy, for some reason, got hit about 25 times.
For some reason?
Yeah, for some reason. I can't figure it out. He never asked for a
I was going to say never played racquetball again? Okay.
He never asked for a rematch.
Boy, that racquetball, that's tougher than wrestling. I'm done with that.
Well, it's funny. Jack and I never hit each other. We just seemed to hit him for some reason.
Bad luck. Bad luck, Buddy.
Yeah. Anyway.
Good stuff. That's a fun story.
Yeah, I've never been able to tell a fun story about Buddy Fuller. I thought that one, all the sad wrestling stories, I thought I'd tell one that's kind of funny. Or fun, at least it was for me. Right. Somebody's laughing. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm sure there's some people out there enjoying it. So you start your feud with Rocky Johnson in July of '75, and it goes on for months. You're working Rocky well into the fall, at least through October, as far as I can see here. And during that time period, you guys even bring in some troops. So, of course, you have some of Gary Hart's army along your side, including Larry Hennig. You're going to team with Hennig more often than not in your tag team matches here throughout September and October. On the other side, Rocky has to go and join forces with the likes of Mark Lewin, Joe LeDuc, of course, Cyclone Negro, and Dusty Rhodes. He's bringing the troops to Bob Roop and company. But do you remember this time period where Larry Hennig comes in and works the Florida territory with you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, Larry was a great partner. He was fun. He was great in the ring. I had the ultimate respect for the guy. I'd been hearing about him for years. In fact, he had come down there a couple of years earlier, a week or two off in the winter. I'd worked with him in Jacksonville. He put me over. And I remember in the match, he got some good heat on me. And then he had me give him a backdrop, and I lifted him. He went way up in the air. And then I beat him with a shoulder breaker. And that really got me over in Jacksonville. Because he was, he was well known. He was been on magazine covers for years. So when he came into work for a couple of months, I was thrilled to get him as a partner. I mean, in my mind, I was like a lieutenant. He was like a colonel. I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell, but that's the way I looked at things. To me, years in the business, especially if you were good, years in the business meant something to me. They had a lot more experience than I had. Say we were all studying the dictionary. They had already finished the dictionary. I was down to maybe M. I knew all the words down to M, but from N on down to Z, I didn't know that yet, and they did. That's the way I felt about it. Not that we all had to talk about the business all the time, but I just had I felt the respect for that longevity. And now I did ride with Larry one time years earlier. Back from a show like Sarasota or someplace with him and his wife. And I saw him again when we were inducted into the Hall of Fame. The same year, his wife was there, of course. In fact, Larry at the Hall of Fame, Larry brought a bus full of people from up there from Minnesota, a whole bus full of people.
Wow,
down to the Hall of Fame. His children and friends. I think he had a realty business up there. And he knew a lot of people. And, he had a whole load of people come with him. Bret Hart was an inductee. Larry and I made it at the end of our careers, and Brett just ended up in New York. But what Brett had that Larry and I didn't have, Brett had been with WWE or WWF and then WWE for 14 years. And the latter part of that time, he'd been on national TV for 5 or 6 years on top. He'd been a star in WrestleMania 2 or 3 times, or at least one of the featured match, or any of the other pay-per-views they did. So he had a lot of he had recognition all over the country. Larry and I didn't. We were retired by the time the national TV,
right.
The cable came along. I had a few matches down there with Ole.
Right,
but I had
TBS.
I've been retired for 20-some years. So 2006, right. I've been retired for, I've been retired a while. So, yeah, Brett had 1,000 people come to try to get his autograph and a picture or whatever.
Sure.
And Larry and I mean, Larry, to my mind, Larry had easily as distinguished a career as Brett did, but it just wasn't he wasn't as well known because of the varieties of television he was on. He didn't have the exposure that Brett did.
There was a period there where Larry teamed with Harley Race in the 60s. They were pretty much the top heel team in all the magazines back then, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, they were. I mean, they had spent some time together as a tag team for a few years there, drawing money in the main events, working against Vern Gagne and that up there in Minnesota. So, yeah, Larry Hennig had been around the block by this point. I think he had to be about 40 by the time he comes here in somewhere around there. By the time he comes in here in 75 to team with you. But I was just curious, what a team that would make, because he was a Minnesota State high school champion, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he was. You know what? Larry was a really nice guy, but he was tough too. He wasn't hell fellow well met kind of nice guy. He was, if he liked you, he was a fun guy. He was a good guy to be around, a good sense of humor, good stories, and in a car, fun to be with, and a good partner. What they were doing, I think, what was happening at the time, was I was being given seasoning. You got to remember, I'm in a match with me and Larry Hennig against Rocky Johnson and Cyclone Negro, for example. Mm-hmm. All those guys have got 20 plus years in the business or more. I've got 6. So to be in there with them, I mean, in 1975, I started in 69. So midway in the middle of the year, or like the end of summer. So here we are in the early beginning of the summer in 1975. I've been in the business 6 years. Now, I'm with these guys, and trying to work at their level. I mean, I didn't sit in the corner. I got in there and worked too. So I think that Eddie was trying to give me a lesson in the ring by being around these guys. And it also came up to me why I didn't work long programs with Dusty Rhodes. This, again, just a thought. Eddie had long-term plans for me to come back to Florida forever, go out for a year or two if I'd been there too long, and then come back and do another year or two. He was building me and giving me all this exposure from day one, putting me with Larry when I've been in the business in Jacksonville, and I've been in the business a couple of years, and then tagging me with him 4 years later when he comes in. So I'm up there in this heavy company. Later on, when I left after this 2-year period there that we're in the middle of talking about, I recall Eddie talking to me and telling me, he said, you've learned everything you need to know now. He said, you can go somewhere and get yourself over and make money. And he didn't say anything about booking, but he said, you can go and get yourself over and make money. And he was right. I could go anywhere and do it because I had been taught. I'd worked in the office, and I had booked, and I'd become a decent worker. I still wasn't tremendously experienced, but the experience I did have, I didn't have to do. Jack Brisco had to do like 7 or 8 years. He wasn't the main event. I mean, he had a few, I'm sure, but he didn't get his first break where he was on top all the time until he came to Florida, at least my understanding. Mm-hmm. Is that what you know too, Ray? Or
yes, as far as I know, Jack really never, got that push until he got to Florida. I mean, obviously Eddie Graham saw a lot in him. He had the background that he needed to be taken seriously in the Florida territory, which was very wrestling oriented. Not saying that, maybe the great Malenko didn't have his teeth stomped in the ring every once in a while, but it's that's another story. There's a lot. For every Dusty Rhodes throwing an elbow, and for every wild Russian chain match between Eddie Graham and the great Malenko, there was also a lot of great wrestling. There's a lot of background in college and high school wrestling and fundamentals like that for a lot of the talent that came through here.
Well, that was the thing. If you had a card that had girls, midgets, or little people, or the giant, or or show that's like Haystacks or somebody, where you got these gimmick matches, Eddie would always be sure to have at least one, if not two matches on the card. The first match was not going to be a gimmick match. First match was going to be a wrestling match.
Right.
Go out there and wrestle for 10 minutes. Don't get out of the ring. You can do high spots and all that. You can run around, but no cheers. Don't get out of the ring. Keep it in the ring. Don't knock the referee. Don't just have a wrestling match.
You got to build the show.
And then maybe a second match could be something a little gimmicky, and then one of the other matches before the main event would be wrestling too. Like a Johnny Valentine type, but only maybe 20 minutes. Maybe Hiro Matsuda against somebody like me, where we'd go 20 minutes through.
Would you say a good wrestling show, a well-booked wrestling show should have a little bit of everything for everyone? Yes. Because everybody has different tastes, right? Maybe there are some people that want to go out and see a classic Dory Funk versus Jack Brisco type match, but other guys want to see the blood and guts, and even other people they just want to see Dusty Rhodes throw elbows, right? A little bit of fun for everybody. Well,
if you remember, you might not be old enough, but if you remember the Ed Sullivan Show of Shows, that was on every Sunday night when I was a kid. It was a variety show. He had guys that would be jugglers, a magician, singers, actors. He had all different kinds. He didn't have the same thing, one act after another. He didn't have like 4 jugglers on there. He had one.
Right.
Yeah, he had one puppet guy. He had one acrobat or whatever. So, and that wrestling show should be the same way, a variety show.
That's exactly what I was just thinking, a variety show,
Yeah, and give you, like you say, something for everybody. Not everybody has the same temperament. There's nothing wrong with putting a lot of icing on a cake, and the cake is the match. The stuff we did up in Knoxville later, we'll get into, of using a box and bringing people down to the ring in a box, a big crate. What? You bring people down to the ring, a wrestler down the ring in a crate on a forklift? Yeah, we did. You're saying that's not too gimmicky a match? No, because the guy who got out of the crate, a little while later, he won 45 minutes and had a great wrestling match.
Right.
So everybody enjoyed the crate. Now, if he'd have gotten in the crate, saluted the people, went back to the dressing room, and that was the show, it'd be suck big time. But no, after he got out of the crate, they had a great match. Les Thatcher, I'm still hot at you about that. I saw
Les was not a fan of that gimmick.
Well, that by itself, it is kind of outrageous. But
that's wrestling to me.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. How can you say? Okay, I like outrageous stuff, but only when it's blood and and brass knuckles and all that. I don't want anything with clowns and all that. Well, how about if the clowns with little wrestling added is the one that's selling out, and the one with all the blood and guts, after about a month of that, people stopped coming. Well, yeah, but I still think I want the blood and guts. Well, you're fired. We're going to have something else.
Les worked for Jim Cornette when Cornette was promoting Smoky Mountain Wrestling back in the 90s, and Cornette has went on record to say that everything's more over when it comes out of a box. So you have to wonder if they ever had that conversation between Corny and Les about Les's opinion in regards to those box storylines. Because Cornette grew up in the Memphis territory, right? That was the king of silly gimmicks and funny stuff and variety, if you will. And it's funny to think.
And Memphis grew for years, right?
They did well, Jackie Fargo and then Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett, in his time in the ring, he did well. So there was a lot.
I went in there cold 2 or 3 times, cold.
I've seen that
against Lawler, and we did well. I mean, I don't think it was a sellout. It was a good house. I was cold. I'd never been on their TV.
I've seen that, Bob. Just randomly, you go and work a random show for Memphis. It goes all the way back here. It looks like later this year, I think in December of '75, you work a one-off with Ron Fuller in Memphis for absolutely no reason. And I don't know if that's just a typo, but it seems to be accurate. And it's so odd that you just randomly show up in Memphis. You work that. I think every time you go in there, you see what you're dealing with, and you hit the bricks maybe, because this would have been back in '75. This would have been Nick Goulas time period.
I met his son at one of the Scott Teal's reunions, but I never met Nick. And not that he wouldn't have bothered me. Hell, I knew Roy Shires. There's nobody more venal than him.
Right.
Nick, I guess, was competing with that, but well. Frankie Kane knocked both of them out, so I guess maybe he does. Maybe Goulas does compare with Roy Shire.
Yeah, I don't know the Frankie story in regards to Goulas. I do know the Shire one. He didn't put up with Shire's shit, but I guess maybe if I'd heard the story, I've forgotten over time in regards to Goulas and Frankie Kane. But that does not surprise me one bit.
Frankie was. Frankie was the nicest guy in the world. But he was a tough cookie. He grew up on the streets, literally. He was like an orphan. He was doing protection for ladies of the night when he was a teenager. He was protecting girls who sometimes had customers that tried to steal from them. Mm-hmm. Ladies, prostitutes. So this guy, he grew up hard. He grew up fast. But one of the sweetest guys in the world, tremendously talented, tough, I'll tell you. I'd rather fight some great big guy than Frankie. Mm-hmm. He's one of those guys that's going to put his head down, bring his fist up, and come start looking at your jaw and figure out how soon it's going to take to knock you out.
Did you say you ran into Les Thatcher at Waterloo?
Yeah, he was inducted into the hall down there.
Yeah, that's right. He was there.
Yeah, and it's good. We're not close, and Les is fine. We have two different opinions, not opinions. We have two different conceptions of what pro wrestling is. Mm-hmm. My conception is that it's whatever is being promoted that sells, that's not immoral. I mean, hurting people is not leading to the degradation and the humiliation of the people doing it or the people watching it. We've gone from just grab a hold to Buddy Rogers came along, and all of a sudden it's dye your hair blonde, get a tan, do as many high spots as you can, and going back to get a hold. And it's been back and forth. Mm-hmm. Gorgeous George, how can you be more outrageous than that?
Right.
I'm not saying that he was doing the gay thing, but he's got bobby pins, he's got a valet, he's got a robe when nobody else had one, perfumes. But yeah, back in the day when being gay was like worse than being a communist in people's mind. Yeah,
he made a lot of money with that gimmick.
Oh man, yeah, boys, you know what? People, we're still talking about him, aren't we? I think he was dead by the time I got into business. If not, he's certainly been out of the business for a long time. Yeah. But he was on national TV. He was on the Ed Sullivan Show, I think, or maybe it was Jack Benny, and I think he did some USO tours.
Well, the old saying that Gorgeous George was probably responsible for selling as many TV sets when television became a thing as Milton Berle, because everybody wanted to watch wrestling with it. For the Gorgeous George, the character was made for television. Boy, did those come out! I know George was already working before TV, but what a perfect time to have that character, right? You turn on your television set for the first time, and what the hell is that? That's not perfect. It's amazing.
Well, you want to watch, don't you? You want to see what that is.
Yeah.
Oh, no, don't change the channel. No, we're not going to watch the Lone Ranger. We're watching this.
Who is this guy that insists his opponent be sprayed with perfume because he can't stand his stench before he'll even step in the ring? To come up with the characters that some of these guys did in the time frames where they were trendsetters. They invented these characters. Some of these things started at some point, right? And they say George actually got the idea from an old buddy of his in Texas who was doing something similar down there in Texas and Mexico right before George was doing it. But that, George is the one that took it big time on the West Coast and got it over and made the money with it. So it is what it is. But there's so much talent as I look through here in Florida in 75. We could go on forever just looking at these names. And I want to drop some more on you next episode as well. You win the tag team title, Florida Tag Belts with Roger Kirby here in the summer. We touched a little bit on Roger in a past episode, not a whole lot on him. Man, you got the heavyweight title, you got the tag team titles, you're doing well. You're working for the world title, Jack Brisco. You're doing 3-month runs with Terry Funk on top. I mean, people can't say that you weren't being groomed for something very special here in the Florida territory. And a lot of guys get 6 months. Some guys, if they're lucky, they get a year in a territory. You're going to do a full 2 years here before you move on to San Francisco this time around. So we've got a whole lot more to touch on.
Yeah, have you figured out? I've been looking at the 75 and 76. Mm-hmm. Have you figured out yet why I lasted 2 years?
I'm assuming because you were getting over. That was have I figured it out? Do you have a revelation?
Bob Orton Jr.
Is that what it is?
Well, if you're starting in the middle of 1976,
mm-hmm.
Bobby and I worked the whole month of 1 month. Every match we had was a tag match, me and Bobby against somebody.
Well, I know you guys had a hell of a tag team there.
And the next month, it was every match but one. I think Bobby was off doing something. So in 2 months, every match, every night was a tag match. Because Bobby and I, they didn't have any idea how we were going to get over when we put us together. We just clicked.
Yeah.
Just happened. We didn't practice. Just happened. So that's another story. But yeah, I was looking now and saying, well, no wonder I lasted 2 years. Well, you told me 2 years. I mean, I knew you weren't misleading me, but I thought, wow, how did I last in there 2 years?
Right.
You know, and I thought, well, when I looked at I was looking at 75 and 76. I thought, well, here comes Bobby, and then also with Bobby comes Senior when we need him. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, and that's a good call, your stuff with Bob Orton, because it did give you longevity. It did breathe life into, not that you were falling flat by that point, but as I was going through 75 and I was dissecting this for you when we were going to do this, I'm like, okay, he's doing 3 months with Terry Funk. He's doing 4 months with Rocky Johnson. He's working Dusty off and on. He's teaming a ton with Harley Race. He's got the heavyweight title of Florida. He's got the tag team titles in Florida. What are they going to do with Bob in 76 to keep him around another year? And you're right. That's an excellent point you bring up. It's a whole new world. All right, well, we're just going to throw you with Bob Orton and we'll keep you around, Bob. And then it's like, what do we have here? We didn't realize what we had. And they quickly do, because sooner or later, you guys are going to be teaming up, working with the Grahams, Eddie and Mike, yep. and so much more. So, yeah.
We'd be Dusty and somebody. I can't think of who his partner was. But, what happened, I was looking at two. Bobby and I worked together one match, and then a week. So that week was booked. Starting the next week, we were booked every night for the next 2 months. We were a tag team. So we got over that one night we worked. They didn't know what we were going to do. Bobby and I just probably riding in the car together. We came up with a couple of ways to do high spots that were combos, where two of us did it. We did one where we get the other guy tied in a rope or something, and I'd get thrown out of the ring, and Bobby would pick up his partner. The referee would be working, have his back turned.
Right.
Bobby would pick up his partner and give him a backbreaker, but with his head on the outside, pointing to the outside. I would run up on the top turnbuckle and jump off, and the guy would be laying across Bobby's upper leg. His head and shoulders are like a foot and a half off the ground. I'd come up and drop a knee across the guy's neck. Bobby was flipping. We'd flip the guy. So it looked like he landed on him and flipped him completely over where he landed on his face.
Right.
You're talking about a move that looked like it killed the guy. And we got to be the first time we did that. It's like the place went quiet. It went quiet.
What did we just see? They had to process the move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the booker, Carly, saw that too. And he said, well, yeah, here's something we didn't know. Bobby wasn't doing much by himself. I've been with everybody already.
Right.
You got Bruiser Brody, Abdullah, King Curtis, Big Bad John,
Mark Lewin,
Harley, Larry Hennig. You got all these guys as your partner. What are you going to get? Andre to be your partner? I mean, who are you going to get bigger than that? Bruno Sammartino. So, yeah, how can we rejuvenate Bob? Let's put him in a tag match. And once they saw me and Bobby together, oh man, we had a lot of fun too. That'll be fun to talk about when we get to it.
Well, we're going to get to it next episode as we move into 76. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. And you talk about longevity. You talk about Bob Orton kind of revitalizing Bob Roop by you guys forming this tag team. It's what happens after that, too. Hopefully we'll have time to get into that next episode. We'll have to wait and see. But following that tag team stuff you do with Orton, It's the big feud of the summer of 76. I'm talking about your feud with Steve Kern, and that's going to keep you around for a while, too. My God, what you guys did there. I can't wait to get into that. That's one of the biggest feuds of your career and one of the biggest, most talked about feuds in the history of Florida wrestling in general from that time, the territory era. It's a hell of a setup and it's just so hot. We talked about it a little bit before. We'll touch on it some more because this goes on throughout the summer of 76. Steve Kern versus Bob Roop. What a feud. If you guys don't know about it, go read about it. Go look it up. See if there's any video footage out there on YouTube. And yeah, I always encourage everybody to go watch Bob Roop and Bob Orton. What a tag team. You guys, anytime you're together, whether it's in Florida or Knoxville, random one-off tag team matches in Mid-South, whenever you guys get a chance, you guys just were naturals together as a team. It just worked. It just clicked from the beginning, according to you. And I'm looking forward to talking all about the time frame, 1976, Bob Roop going to team up with Bob Orton Jr., the father of Randy Orton, for those asking out there. Yes, indeed. And we're going to talk about that. Hopefully we get to Steve Kern as well and so much more on the next episode.
Well, it sounds good. I'm telling you, these sessions go so fast. Mm-hmm. You have so many good things that we talk about. You know that you plan on. You let me know what you're planning to talk about. I do a little research, and all of a sudden there it is. We have these great. To me, reliving this history is great. You know, I really enjoy it. So I hope our listeners do out there. And I want to thank everybody that's listening to this, whether it be now or 50 years from now. I want to thank everybody out there, and I want to thank you again, Ray. You are a wonderful partner in this venture.
And that's going to do it here this week for the Wrestling Stoop. Just a reminder, you guys can friend Bob Roop over at Facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. But most of all, I encourage everybody to go over to Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many great gifts there, including early show releases, digital downloads, video casts now available, and so much more. Check it out over at Patreon. Help support the brand. And until next time, on behalf of Bob, we ask you guys to hold tight and see where we head next time. Right here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.